Hey guys, welcome back to Total Tactics FPL. Today's video is going to be the Game Week 26 team selection. So for today's video, what I'll be talking about is why I'm wildcarding in Game Week 26. And I think the easiest way to do that is by starting with my Game Week 25 team. It was an overall good week where I got 91 points, including the hit that I took for Tarkovsky, who pretty much netted me -4 because he had a terrible performance overall. Actually, the Wolves assets did bear out to be better. But I still think, of course, Tarkovsky, if you are not wildcarding, will probably be a little bit more useful than a Wolves defender going forwards. Regardless, it was a bad decision. We also went into Darwin, which turned out to be much worse than expected. He didn't even get to play the first game, so therefore that transfer didn't really work out. Now, he wasn't a hit, but of course, Mitrovic being transferred out, I would have ideally went for someone who would have been able to play 2 games. Unfortunately, Darwin didn't. Otherwise, I would have just gone for Watkins. And potentially, if I was sitting here now with Watkins in my team, I would consider not wildcarding. However, the reality is I have 3 Liverpool players now. They don't have bad games. They certainly do have a double in double game week 29. But I still think that with the blank in 28 and with the United fixture, the ceiling for these Liverpool assets don't seem to be great, and they are occupying a lot of budget in my team. Darwin, Salah, and Trent are all very expensive players. Trent is the most expensive defender in the game, and someone that I don't really fancy in Game Week 29 anyways, when you compare to some of the other assets that will be doubling in that week, that will be cheaper. And overall, the collective shape of my team, if I was to, let's say, start taking hits from Game Week 26 and beyond. I don't even have a single Brighton or Brentford asset, and the reality is there's nothing to really think about there. I do have the right Arsenal assets when it comes down to Gabriel. Of course, you have this sort of 50-50 with Zinchenko when we're talking about wild cards, but I think Gabriel is probably a step ahead of Saliba at least, and maybe arguably White. As far as Odegaard, a lot of people I can see are thinking about going towards Martinelli, and I can understand the move towards Martinelli. What is so exceptionally interesting about Martinelli is even though there is a time crunch with Gabriel Jesus coming back into the team, you might be able to capitalize on a 3-game week window between 26, 27, and 28 where Arsenal have no blanks. They'll be playing in all these fixtures, and Martinelli could effectively be playing and starting all these games. However, Jesus is so close to being at full fitness where I do fear Martinelli could already be benched, or not even be benched, but just have much less minutes within 28 and 27, and that's my concern here. I think 26 is a great Martinelli window. It seems like Nketiah has some issues. It seems like Martinelli will start and Jesus is still not ready at this point in time. So of course, Bournemouth is a fixture which I'm worried about if I want to keep Odegaard in my team. However, you also have to think about what this position in your team is doing. Odegaard and Martinelli is arguably a transfer towards a Bruno Fernandes in Game Week 29, and I think the issue here is you still want to get the maximum effective value from this asset, so probably Odegaard is also going to stay, because I think 90 times 3 is how I see it with Odegaard. With Martinelli, it's all up in the air. As far as Nonto, Andreas, these are both dead assets to me. Andreas, of course, is a blank on 28, and Nonto, just I don't see the ceiling at all. We've talked about it in previous episodes. As far as Haaland, of course, he's probably going to stay. I can see a lot of people wildcarding away from Haaland, but if you're creating, let's say, a perfect team for Game Week 26 and wildcarding, then I still think Haaland finds a way towards your draft. We've seen, of course, that he can match the double game weekers, and I trust in his explosiveness. This is also a great window for me to go into Kane. Now, I haven't owned Kane for several weeks now, and I haven't actually since the World Cup restart, but this is a great time to go into Kane. He has no blanks, and of course, compared to Darwin, you've got a similar amount of fixtures, but I'd probably back Kane just because minutes and also rotation issues with Darwin. So with Salah, I think he's also occupying a lot of money in the team. When we think about the assets that we want to get from these Brighton and Brentford teams that are doubling, you're just talking about assets here that you can play with, such as March and Matoma, that still cost under the price of one Salah. So that's sort of how I feel about it. Yes, some people might have a lot of FOMO with him, think about going towards him in Game Week 29, even if they're wildcarding in 26, but I think it's a little bit ludicrous. Frankly, you now have an opportunity to rejig most of your team, even your bench keeper, to create an effectively good bench boost, because we know this Leicester team are a terrible defense, and the 2 wildcard teams that a lot of people are thinking about are going to be teams like Brighton and Brentford, and they've been a much more positive defensive team, especially if you look at the post-World Cup results. Brentford are a team that arguably are considered a top three to top four defense, and overall for the actual course of the season, Brighton have posted numbers as if they were a top six defense. So this is the landscape of FPL, and I think there is enough opportunity here to bank on these fixtures. We also have to keep in mind that the blanks being removed from Game Week 28 means more of the fixtures have been front loaded in this half of the schedule compared to the back half. Yeah, I think ultimately it seems like Man City and Man United assets, which we'll be building towards eventually anyways at Game Week 29 and beyond, will be able to cover us for the rest of the season, and we won't have many doubts in 34 and 37 for those weeks. So when I'm talking about my free hit opportunity, I think 32 is probably the one exception there where you would want to target some other assets that you would have taken out in Game Week 29. But overall, a good week coming off of Game Week 25, where we sort of dead-ended with these Liverpool assets, took the punt, enjoyed the Trent and Salah hauls, got the captaincy right as well, got Tarkowski wrong, but we move on. So if we head towards my wildcard here, I'm actually going to showcase the full team, and I'll just talk about the assets and what has changed from my wildcard draft in the previous video. What has changed is Reece James has been taken out because he's been assessed as a bit of an injury doubt as per Graham Potter's press conference. So therefore, Henry is someone who's actually joining my team, and Botman is coming into the team as well. The reason why I'm going for Botman, as per Ben Crellin's best guess, it seems like Newcastle will have a double around the early front of 30 to 38. So it makes sense to actually go double Newcastle. They still have great quality results as a team. I think clean sheets is a statistic that a lot of us look to, and of course Newcastle have dropped a few clean sheets as of late, but Bruno has come back into the team, and ultimately you're not going to always get clean sheets in some of the easier fixtures. You can see Man City and their dropping of clean sheets this season as a perfect example of that, but it still makes sense to actually back the best defensive teams, and the best defensive numbers are still being posted by Newcastle with exception to City and Arsenal. So it makes sense for me to go Trippier and Botman, with Reece James being assessed as a doubt. I don't really like going for Chilwell, for example, compared to Reece James. Chilwell just hasn't posted any interesting effective numbers. We've also seen that this Chelsea team have stuck towards a 4-2-3-1 structure, which has actually stagnated both the fullbacks and their offensive returns and their attacking numbers. So if you actually take a quick look at any kind of expected goal involvement statistics of players like Reece James and Chilwell over the last 2 years, you'll see there's a noticeable drop off this season. As far as Zinchenko, he's joined the team, but he was already on my template. I've been talking about how Zinchenko is very similar to Martinelli, where you're looking for an asset that will hopefully cover you towards Game Week 29, and therefore he becomes a very easy and simple transfer towards someone like a Luke Shaw. Even me, for example, if you don't prefer him, could be a transfer towards Shaw. And I like Zinchenko in this situation here because you're talking about an asset who seems to have incredible amounts of touches within the final third of the opponent's halves. He is also increasingly getting more shots on target per game than at the earlier stage of the season. And just going back to touches, he's averaging something like 95 to 100 touches per game, whereas earlier in the season, he was only averaging something like 60 to 70. So you know that the overall offensive impact is there. And I've already talked about how Arsenal are no longer kind of looking for target men with all their set piece routines. Instead, they're actually looking for these really intricate plays, looking for, let's say, Zinchenko, who's open in space, to kind of crack open a shot. As far as Henry, the reason why I'm going for him is simply because he has the chance to play fullback at times, and also the sort of wing-back position. So the hybrid structure of Brentford, depending on their opponents, that sort of back four, back five, it does sometimes situate Henry where he could probably get an assist in open play. So that's kind of why I like Henry. He's also been nailed over the course of the season, so there's no worries there. With Pinnock, I think it's just a question mark and a gamble between me, but I have plenty of money in the bank, and me has ultimately scored 3 goals this season compared to Pinnock's 1. The expected goal involvement is very, very close between the two of them, so it's really just who do you actually back to score a set piece. And for me, it's going to be me. I still think I have plenty of money in the bank. I'm already someone who has already taken Haaland out of his team in game week 15. So I actually don't have any money stored within Haaland. In fact, I own him at 12.2. So it's a very simple transfer in and transfer out if I ever go out of him. So that kind of really benefits me for this wildcard structure. As far as Trippier, he's a nailed and locked option. And I've gone for Sanchez, of course, as you can see, because I've gone for me and Henry. So this is a team that would allow me to get 6 doublers in game week 27. And also it allows me to play a full strength 11 in game week 28 by only forcing one transfer, and that transfer is most likely going to be Haaland to Watkins. But I'll be showing you guys my full sort of 26 to 30 strategy for the short term in the future anyways later on in the video. As far as Rashford, Odegaard, Saka, these are all locks for me. And then with Mitoma, McAllister, of course you have to argue which 2 out of the 3 of the assets from this Brighton midfield would you pick. March actually has the best underlying stats coming out of the World Cup, and that probably suggests that March is the option to pick. However, I think it's very close still. Mitoma is someone who seems to play a little bit more out wide when Estupiñán plays, because you can actually see at times that Estupiñán inverts quite a bit, and he actually looks for these dangerous passes towards the sort of right-hand side of this Brighton attack, and Mitoma is pulling defenders out wide. So the Patterson goal versus Everton is a good example of the sort of position that Mitoma naturally takes within the system. However, I think Mitoma is still an asset that has very close overall underlying numbers when you look at the course of the season. Of course, that includes a lot of games where March was playing right wing back. I just think that Mitoma has that sort of flair that I like, and it's probably going to be a vibes. And the reason why I'm going for Mitoma is simply that. I just think he's an overall more technical, flary player, and I kind of like those players in FPL. As far as McAllister, I think I'm going for him because he's got penalties, and I can see him consistently holding down this number 10 position for this Brighton team. So there's no reason for me to sidestep that. It's a question mark, of course, between McAllister and March for me at this point. I just think that he will actually nail down this 10 position. The underlying stats have flown up in the last 2 games that he's played in this 10 spot, and I'm hoping, of course, that he'll get some returns. I mean, look at a player like March, for example. When Mitoma had these 2 double-digit holes, people were completely off of March, and then suddenly he holes in the next 2 games. Not everyone is going to consistently bang each and every game. March and McAllister and Mitoma have all posted great numbers so far. I don't think there's necessarily a wrong option here. I just think that McAllister at 28 is going to be an interesting one for me, and also in 29. So that's simply what the reality is. I'll be bench boosting with him, so that's why I'm going for McAllister. As far as Tony, Haaland, and Kane, I also think they're non-negotiables. Kane potentially could be viewed as a worse option than Haaland. It just depends on how explosive you view Kane as an asset. I feel like it's a little bit unfortunate so far this season to not get any of these kind of 1 goal, 1 assist, or games where he's actually scored a brace. I feel like it's a bit unfortunate that we know Kane is more than capable of doing that. It's just about also the overall quality of the chance creation that this Tottenham team brings to the table. Kane has been super consistent, and I still prefer him over someone like an Ollie Watkins. And for me, I think if you go without Haaland on this wild card, what troubles me is what transfers are you going to make? Are you going to force a transfer like McAllister to Maddison, for example, with the money in the bank you have saved? Or are you just going to try to build a stronger midfield? Because for me, Game Week 29 is essential, and reducing the amount of transfers until Game Week 29 is good, but you can still leave room for 1 transfer between Game Weeks 26 to 29 to fix your team for, let's say, Game Week 28, where I can easily move Haaland to Watkins, as discussed previously. With Tony, I just think there's a gamble here. There was no updates on the Thomas Frank press conference. Unfortunately, no questions were really asked about Tony, so we'll have to see what happens there. It's clear that Tony will be an exceptional option as long as he gets to play, and I think that what we should be gambling on right now is that he can play. If you don't really want to gamble on Tony not playing, I guess you can go for Iheanacho, Watkins, or Mbeumo, but I don't really think that any other forward options are interesting at this point in time, unless you want to go with someone like Solanke, which is very far left field and might allow you to actually build a stronger midfield with more doublers in Game Week 29, but that's totally up to you. This is going to be my wildcard team for Game Week 26, and I'm locked in here simply because I'll be also locking in the free hit 32 strategy. So the reason why I'm going for Kepa and Sanchez, both players who will blank in 32, is because I know I'll be free hitting on that week, so that's why I'm opting for Sanchez and Kepa. I wanted to actually move towards my wildcard team selection and show you guys what the strategy overall would be from Game Weeks 26 to 30, because there's no use to actually plan my transfers towards Game Week 38. We know that's ridiculous. There's going to be so many things that we have to think about, so many intangibles that I can't explain right now that will happen inevitably. We also have a international break that will probably also change the landscape of FPL. Plus, we don't exactly know what's going to happen with the next few fixtures. We could already have some key injuries that make this wildcard a little bit worse, but based on the available information that we have hand, these are the transfers that I've planned up until Game Week 30. And the reason why we've gone for such a cheap team effectively is to make sure that I have enough money in the bank to pull out some transfers. So if we look at Game Week 26, of course, we lay it exactly the same as we would in terms of putting the Trippier, the Botmans, the McAllisters on the bench. McAllister versus Mitoma, you just have to weigh up who you actually rather in this game. I probably value Mitoma a little bit more. And yeah, I don't think it's too far away between the two. Mitoma actually has the best gambling odds to score, so I'm going to go with him. As far as Brentford versus Newcastle defense, I'm probably just going to take a punt on Brentford at home versus Newcastle away, specifically also versus Man City. This time last season when Newcastle were on a terrific run, I still remember Man City absolutely decimating them at their own home. So I kind of have that in my mind. And I also think that Brentford, as I said, have posted great numbers at home, but I feel like the narrative of them being poor away from home is also overstated. They've ultimately been one of the top defensive teams after the World Cup, and it's a good opportunity to bank on their defense, even though Mitrovic is actually back. If you want to go with a bit more of a safer play with a similar structure, I guess you could play Trippier and me, but I'm happy and comfortable enough to go with the two Brentford players for now. And then in Game Week 27, we've got no transfers to make. The only change is you have to unfortunately put some Arsenal players on your bench. This is interesting, right? Because a lot of people have been saying that Game Week 27 could be an excellent bench boost opportunity. Why is that? So you have these Arsenal players that you're unfortunately putting onto the bench. If you feel like Arsenal are going to absolutely destroy Fulham, like they destroyed Everton, then this would be a great opportunity to put a bench boost on, right? Botman, Zinchenko, Odegaard, arguably all have good fixtures. Maybe Zinchenko less so, playing away from home versus a Fulham team that have simply found it very easy to score, with exception to the game at Stamford Bridge. Then, of course, Kepa versus Leicester, not as interesting, but still an overall good keeper who's playing versus a team that seems to be very 50-50 in terms of whether they're actually able to consistently score. We saw, of course, the terrible FA Cup result recently from Leicester, so that probably colors our opinions as to whether Leicester is a good team. So you have to think about who are you actually sacrificing on the bench in Game Week 27. It's probably going to be 1 to 2 doublers at the absolute maximum compared to Game Week 29. If you don't want to deal with the doubts of the international break, you potentially could bench boost on this week. However, I'm not going to do so. I am unfortunately going to leave a lot of points on the bench. As far as Game Week 28, though, we now move into a situation where, of course, the captaincy is up for debate, but Haaland will be exiting my team, and then I'll have a lot of money in the bank. So I'll be going from Haaland to Watkins here. And the transfer makes sense because Watkins will then have a double in the subsequent week, even though Haaland plays versus Liverpool. You ultimately have 3 fixtures versus Haaland's 1. So I'm willing to take the bet on Watkins having 3 fixtures versus Haaland having 1, and this is why I'm going to do that transfer then. And of course, you get Brentford playing at home versus Leicester, which is very positive, and then Arsenal, who overall have a great fixture as well, at home once again versus a Crystal Palace team. So a great transfer here in terms of moving away from Haaland, and because I don't have the sort of money in the bank kept in Haaland, I will have no regrets here. And then with Game Week 29, we'll now be moving to a situation where I will be bench boosting. So this will be where I plan to use my bench boost. And Sanchez, Saka, Mitoma, McAllister are arguably all my bench players. Of course, you could see the Brentford players as the bench players. It doesn't really matter. The captaincy and the vice captaincy will be between the United assets, who I think have actually good fixtures as well. Maybe you would have a different opinion on that. Maybe you could go for someone from Chelsea if you actually embrace someone from Chelsea in your team, because they have 2 home games. However, one of them is versus Liverpool, so we'll have to see the kind of form of Chelsea and Liverpool at that point in time. Brighton also have decently good fixtures too. Bournemouth is one of them, and then Brentford at home is much more favorable to Brentford away. So that's going to be another opportunity if you want to be super ambitious, I guess, to go for a differential captain with someone like Mitoma or McAllister. In this situation, of course, I'm just laying out the template, which is going to be Rashford captaincy for me. And this bench boost seems to be very easy to play. Now, we do lose our Arsenal assets here, but I think they do hit a pretty terrible run, and the only good game is going to be in Game Week 32, where I'm going to be free hitting anyways. So that's the rough plan. And then in Game Week 30, because I have so much money holed up in the bank, I can go from Tony into Haaland. And this is hopefully going to align with Tony getting banned from football or suspended, whatever the case may be. And therefore, Tony to Haaland should be a very simple transfer, where even if Tony seems like he has good fixtures going forward after this point, ultimately he's going to be playing versus Haaland, so that's going to be a tricky situation. I haven't actually changed my bench for Game Week 30. Of course, I'm not planning to actually bench Saka, Mitoma, and McAllister, but Of course, we could probably think about going me and Henry on the bench and then just playing someone like Saka McAllister at that point. We'll see what happens then. However, this is going to be the rough transfer. It's going to be Haaland back in Game Week 30. I only lose him for one fixture, arguably, and that's just going to be versus Liverpool. And that probably is the best way to go around it, in my opinion, so far with the sort of team value that I have. I could also, if we go back towards Game Week 29, I could potentially go out of a Ben Mee as well if I don't really like these Brentford fixtures and I only really want to back Henry here and I'm really scared of losing Zinchenko for whatever reason. That could be a transfer I do, but of course the next fixture anyways is going to be Liverpool versus Arsenal, where I'm thinking that Liverpool will score anyways in that game. So that's kind of how I'm planning to play out these transfers in the short term. We will talk, of course, as we come by each game week deadline as to how the plans change, but this is going to be how I plan to lay out for now. And the strategy, of course, will be game week 26 wildcard, game week 29 bench boosts, and the game week 32 free hit. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.